fantastic conference about religious sensibilities, Catholicism and modernity. And our first speaker is Inmaculada Blasco de la Universidad de La Laguna with a paper on When Catholicism Met Modernity, some reflections from recent Spanish gender historiography. Inmaculada, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Let me first thank my colleagues for having invited me to participate in this conference. I also apologize for not having been able to attend the event in person. I would like to so much to be there, and I hope I can travel to Valencia next time. When Isabel Bourdiel invited me to participate in this suggestive and exciting conference on gender, modernities, and the global enlightenment, I asked myself whether I was an appropriate historian to offer a scholarly reflection here, given that I see myself as a 20th century historian. In fact, the period I will speak about will be the second half of the 19th and the early 20th century. Although I knew I could feel a little out of place and I could learn much more than I could give, I accepted the invitation, given that I see the space an opportunity for contact, debate, comparison, and reflection. My contribution will be mostly based on the excellent research of Spanish historians who have been rethinking Spain's historical exceptionality and revisiting dominant narratives of the nation's past. A key structure of these narratives is the treatment of Catholicism as both monolithic and unchangeable through time. The image of Catholicism as the major and continuous exponent of anti-modern views and notions through the 19th and 20th centuries has obliterated its ability to accommodate, resist, adapt to the challenges of modernity. A particular significant element of this narrative has been the consideration of the relationship between Catholicism and women as one of complete subordination and a pervasive, enduring hierarchy based on pre-modern or Tridentine notions of sexual difference. But questioning those narratives doesn't mean that our analysis must inevitably take a pendular swing, leading to claims, for example, that Catholicism was good or not so bad for women, or that it was more modern than liberals were, or that the beginnings of the modern world lay in Catholicism. Far from these assertions, or sometimes assumptions, and I would even say against them, I think the challenge is to approach the subject in dialogue with controversies that have taken place in recent years in the fields of gender history and religious history studies. In fact, these two especially dynamic areas of historical studies have come together to offer interesting contributions to the interpretations of modern Spanish history in a broader European and Western frame. On the one hand, then, a more refined theoretical and methodological reflection on issues such as gender identity formation, women's historical agency, and changing power relations has guided significant changes in approaching the relationship between women and Catholicism from a historical perspective. In the mid-1990s, the all-encompassing subordination of women within modern Catholicism was questioned by research into women's agency, even within unequal gender norms, such as those imposed by the Catholic Church. Nevertheless, emphasis on women's agency and visibility in religious frames has recently been nuanced by approaches whose interest lies in exploring action as a result of complex identities shaped by specific but changing and contingent cultural imaginaries on gender, nation, class, religion. Narrative has then been partially transformed by studies engaged more in explanation and description than in open evaluation and or judgment. At least in my own work, as an interesting reference has been Saba Mahmoud's questioning of both the oppression and the agency feminist interpretations of women's religious identity, and her proposal of studying non-secularized subjects in a more explicative than evaluative manner. On the other hand, the history of the religious factor is also undergoing a dramatic transformation. Long trapped by historical confrontation between secularist and anti-clerical versus clerical forces, historians have tended to critically reproduce each view in their narratives, reinforcing different memories of past conflict, especially the Civil War and Francoism, a central theme in the public and political arena. Recently, historian Javier Ramón has expressed this idea beautifully, and I quote, "For a long time, the history of religion in Spain has navigated between Charybdis and Scylla, between apology and critique, hagiography and diatribe. Though not an easy task and further complicated by the conservative turn in the Spanish Church towards strengthening intra-ecclesiastical viewpoints, some historians have deemed it worthy to develop an academic historiography attentive to this religious factor in modern Spanish history, in dialogue with other European historiographies." And an example of this is the creation of the Association of Religious Modern History. Opening our outlook to European historical literature on secularization processes and the role religions have played in them has been crucial. First of all, as this conference itself exemplifies, it allows for emphasis to be placed on the centrality of transnational networks, circulations, and exchanges of all kinds for understanding national and imperial histories. In any case, much more research is needed on the circulation of ideas in Catholic circles all over Europe in the making and remaking, for example, of the Black International or l'Internationale Noire, following the title of the book edited by Emile Lambert. But also, those openings imply an engagement in European and worldwide debates on religion and secularization, examining how they can illuminate our own exploration. Indeed, the questioning of the secularization narrative and more recently, the criticism of an all-explaining feminization thesis as a theoretical framework have been two of the main challenges and drivers of another way of looking at Spain's religious past and the ways gender notions operated in it. European research projects involving Germany, Belgium, the Nordic countries, and France have produced remarkable results. I am thinking in the work of Peter Pastor, or Marie Werner, Olaf Blaschke, Tine van Osselaer for the 19th and the early 20th century. Following a critical stance of the secularization thesis, Catholicism, like other confessions, did not become marginal with the advance of liberal principles and institutions. On the contrary, Catholics responded to them by launching a project of recatholicization through an adjustment to modernity. Catholicism walked its own way to modernity, adopting and adapting not only resources and patterns of mobilization, but also ideas and categories of liberal modernity, such as modern nation and modern sexual difference. In other words, aside from a reaction to liberal principles and an eventual reinforcement of Tridentine conceptions of gender and the body, there was also a mutual influence, imbrications, and entanglements, which can better explain not only the nature and specificity of at least part of Spanish liberalism, but also the Catholic subjects shaped in a formally liberal and confessional state since the middle of the 19th century. New terms have been coined by historians such as Joseba Louzao, Julio de la Cueva, Feliciano Montero, and others to refer to this Catholic reshuffling in the modern world and to the situation deriving from the confrontation with secularist drives in Spain. These terms include religious recomposition of modernity, defensive modernity, or troubled secularization, which have been applied mostly to the period of Bourbon restoration from 1876 onwards. On the subjects, one of the subjects of historical research which better shows these undertakings is the origins and evolution of modern Catholic women as a collective subject and agent mobilized in defense of the place of Catholicism and the Catholic Church in politics and society against the secularization process. Indeed, as Maricruz Romeo stresses, since 1851, women's involvement in the rechristianization project was part of a broader European project against materialism and secularism, led by the Church and seeking to retrieve the spaces and power lost after the Liberal Revolution. The work of Maricruz Romeo, Raúl Mínguez, and Diego Palacios has provided not only new information on the petitions and collective signatures by women, but also an approach attentive to this Catholic recasting of modernity. Interestingly, legitimization of Catholic women's involvement in this public discussion was not only the right to give an opinion on Catholicism's place in the nation and the state, which concerned them especially as mothers, as the moral axis of Christian families, and instillers of values and customs. Equality and freedom also had a place in their rhetoric, as equal souls, rational beings, free mothers, and compañeras, considered emancipated by Catholicism from slavery. Romeo's analysis of the mobilization in 1856 maintains that they act through old and new categories. Palacios shows the similarities between Portuguese and Spanish Catholic women's petitions in that they combined, I quote, they combined liberal principles, the right to give opinion, and a Catholic reading of equal dignity of the souls. Souls have no sex. The Church was not mobilizing a pre-modern female subject. As historian Raúl Mínguez has shown, a transformation from misogyny, although it still pervaded Catholic Church rhetoric, to a discourse on femininity deeply influenced by liberal model gender ideals took place from 1851 onwards. After the signing of the Concordat between the Vatican and the liberal state under Isabel II, Catholic gender rhetoric was reformulated through a tense dialogue with gender liberal discourse. As a result, modern sexual difference was gradually accepted and adopted by at least some Spanish Catholics in the late 19th century. The conception that human beings were divided into two sexes whose differences were completely reducible and the central place assigned to motherhood and domesticity in defining true femininity by God's will and also by natural law became common sense in Catholic lay circles. Nevertheless, resistance to liberal formulations took place, for instance, on the basis of a Catholic conception of an all-pervasive nature of religion not restricted to the private realm. what Romeo regards as a more fluid understanding of the separation of spheres than that assumed by liberals and Republicans, framed an action conceived and shown as religious beyond or above politic. The firm conviction that questions of belief had nothing to do with political opinion guided Catholic women's public action in defense of church and religion. And this was so until the beginning of the 20th century. Catholics overtly rejected the liberal secularist mandate of cloistering religion in the private sphere, and saw no reason not to mobilize women out of it for that purpose. Discussions on gender, Catholicism, and liberalism have been linked to debates on Spanish nationalism and modern nation-building processes. Until very recently, this process had been evaluated as weak, among other reasons, because church and Catholic milieus were forces that curbed modern nationalization efforts and national identity construction, given their pre-modern character and the loyalties in conflict between the nation-state and the Vatican authorities. Research done in the last 15 years has demonstrated, and for example, the essays collected in the recent volume coordinated by Romeo Tabanera and Salomón, Católicos Reaccionarios y Nacionalistas, shows this research has demonstrated that from the middle of the 19th century at least, Catholics have contributed to forge a specific version of the modern Spanish nation, a vision which also contained a gender dimension perfectly represented and cultivated in the novels, for example, of Ferran Caballero, the pseudonym adopted by Cecilia Boll Faber, who was the daughter of the introducer of Romanticism in Spain and the realist Frasquita Larrea, and as one research of la Universidad de Valencia has shown, Xavi Andreu, the model of Catholic women presented by this writer, by Ferran Caballero, was not only the product of the persistence of an old or unchanged Catholic discourse, but also was the result of the articulation after the liberal revolutions of a Catholic nationalist discourse in which women appeared as regenerative forces of the Spanish nation. This became clear at the beginning of the 20th century when Catholic lay movements were boosted by national rechristianization as a way of regenerating the nation in crisis after the loss of the last colonies in 1891. To conclude, I would like to introduce some reflections of another subject related to this combination of gender and Catholicism, which is the question of the Catholic devotions and sensibilities in the frame of these dynamics of Catholic, or what I see as the Catholic adjustment to modernity. The term feminización de la piedad, or feminization of piety, was coined to speak about the spreading by the Church of a kind of religiosity appealing to sense and emotions, identified as attributes of 19th century bourgeois femininity. Marian devotions and the cult of the Sacred Heart, respectively, represented Mary as a virginal and loving mother, and God as the Son closer to human beings and in a suffering body. No doubt, it was both of those devotions and the way they were presented were the result of the Church project of rechristianizing and nationalizing the people and attracting women to act as apostles. However, these new devotions should also be rethought as part of a change in sensibilities not alien to mutations in gender and body notions in liberal bourgeois sociability. Pessimistic body notions seem to have been at least partially displaced by soft figurations of the body throughout the century. Feelings and emotions moved to the forefront of Catholic expressions of faith. However, at the same time, modern gender expectations and gender sphere divides were not so meaningful in shaping late 19th century and early 20th century devotions and spirituality, as Carol Harrison for France, Tim van Osselaer for Belgium, and Natalia Núñez for Spain have shown. I stop here, and I just wanted to introduce some questions in my intervention related to the way Catholicism has been thought by Spanish historiography, and the critical viewpoints that new research have been introducing or have been exploring recently in relation also to gender history. I hope that it can be stimulating for discussion, and I hope I made myself understood. Thank you very much.